Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Pied Piper of Pasadena, Part 10. This is the story of Dean Corll. When we last left off, we talked about how Dean Corll had given David Brooks a brand new Corvette. And upon learning to drive and starting to drive, he would shortly befriend 17-year-old Randall Harvey, where they would eventually get into an altercation over stolen radio parts. And on March 9th, 1971, they would abduct and tie Randall Harvey and bring him into Dean Corll's apartment, where they would torture, sodomize, and kill him with a single gunshot wound to the head. After they had done killing Randall Harvey, they would bury his body in the boat shed. Even though Dean Corll would not give David Brooks $200 for this child, David Brooks considered killing him payment enough. Now, on May 9th, 1971 at 2 p.m., 13-year-old David Hillegeist would leave his home and begin walking to a nearby pool to join his other brothers and sisters to go swimming. But along the way there, he would start thinking about swimming with his family and was a little bit insecure about how other kids would basically see him in his swimming trunks. So instead of going to the pool, he would make a detour over to his neighbor and friend's house, Gregory Winkle, who was 16 years old. Now, Gregory Winkle would talk to David Hillegeist, and they would decide to continue to go swimming at the pool. And they would leave his house and begin the walk. But they would not even get halfway there, and people would even testify and say they would be seen climbing into the back of a white windowless van, which we both know at this point who owned that white windowless van. And by this point, it's pretty fair to assume that once the boys had approached the white van, they probably noticed Dean Corll from his days as the Candy Man. And once they had approached the van, Dean Corll probably invited them in for illicit substances such as weed and promised to get the boys alcoholic beverages at his apartment, as he had done so many times before. But needless to say, they would be seen climbing into this van to where they would go into Dean Corll's apartment. And as I said in our previous video, that this would be the most disturbing story that I've read about so far, and it really is. Not just considering the age of David Hillegeist and Gregory Winkle, but just what actually happened to these poor boys. It is said that once in the apartment, Dean would get them to the point of intoxication, to where he would then shackle and strip both boys to his torture board suspended from the ceiling. There, he would begin torturing the boys by inserting glass rods into their urethras, and then taking a blunt force object and smashing it over their private parts so that the glass rods would actually shatter inside them. He would then also torture them more and sodomize both boys. At 11:30 at night, Dean Corll would make Gregory Winkle call his mother at 11:30 p.m. His mother would answer the phone, and she would say, "Where are you?" And one thing that kind of made her kind of suspicious is Gregory would get quiet, and she could actually visibly hear a bunch of whispering over the phone. And he would get back on the receiving end, and he would tell his mother that he was in Freeport. His mother would express how irritated she was with Gregory, and that she did not allow him to be out so late, even if it was to be swimming, to which she would hang up the phone. Shortly after that phone call, Dean Corll would take his nylon cord and sodomize and strangle both Gregory Winkle and David Hillegeist. He would wrap them in a plastic sheet, put them in the back of his car, and bury them in the back of the boat shed next to Randall Harvey. David Hillegeist would be buried in the fetal position, whereas Gregory Winkle will be buried sitting up. Earlier that evening, about 3 hours after David Hillegeist had gone missing, Mrs. Hillegeist would actually be informed by David's other brothers and sisters that he had never arrived at the pool that day. So both Mr. and Mrs. Hillegeist would actually go around driving all throughout town looking for David. It would not quit until about 3:30 in the morning, to which around 6:30 in the morning the next following day would make an appointment to the police station. They would tell the police that David Hillegeist had been missing for at least 24 hours. The police would suggest that maybe David Hillegeist had stayed the night at a friend's house without telling them. When the parents would tell the police that he was not the kind of boy that would do that, the police would speculate that David Hillegeist was probably a runaway. The Hillegeists would actually eventually go to the parents of the Winkles because they had been made aware that they were looking for Gregory as well. And Gregory Winkle's mother would tell the Hillegeists about the very strange, odd phone call they received at 11:30 at night. So they would take it upon themselves to go to Freeport and go around and look for Gregory Winkle and David Hillegeist. It is at this point that both the Hillegeists and the Winkles were pretty much convinced if the police were not going to help them, they were going to take matters in their own hands. And money was no option. They would do whatever it took to find their lost children. They would go around Freeport and asking anyone if they had seen their children, bringing with them photographs so that they could show the people what their children looked like, to no avail. The Hillegeists would even go and hire a private investigator who would go around Freeport and the other surrounding areas of Texas looking for both David Hillegeist and Gregory Winkle. He would search for about 3 weeks before giving the Hillegeists a bill of $1,100, which would roughly be about $8,700 in today's money, putting the Hillegeists further into debt. They would even make lost and found posters, even claiming a reward if anyone knew the whereabouts of their children. And they would even put their phone numbers to where most of the phone calls they would receive were either bogus calls or lame tip-offs. While passing out lost and found photos, they would be approached by one of Gregory's friends from school, Elmer Wayne Henley, who was 15. And he would be seen trying to help the parents find the lost children, and had even been seen giving consoling words to both parents, saying that, "I'm pretty sure they're going to turn up at some point. They're probably right under our nose and we don't even know it." The Winkles would later say that what seemed really odd about Elmer Wayne Henley was that he seemed very visibly intoxicated. And as I have just said recently, they even opened up phone numbers so that anyone could call them. And as I said, most of the phone calls they received were pretty bogus. That is, except of course of one phone call tip that they received that did seem to have some credit. One particular anonymous caller would say that Gregory Winkle had a friend that was about in his late 20s, early 30s, and had been seen driving around a Plymouth GTX, and had even went through the expense of even writing down the license plate of that car, putting down the license plate TMF 724. The parents, thinking that this was a very valid piece of information, would take it to the police. But the police would not even investigate it and would say it was probably just another bogus tip. But what is very wrong about what the police speculated at that point is that tip actually would have been very credible, because that car and license plate belonged to one Dean Coral, who not only knew of Gregory Winkle and David Hillegeist, knew exactly where they were.